Hello again, everyone. This is Robin, and in this segment, we are going to tackle daily routines. So, when we talked about life with work balance and wellness, there were some ideas presented about how we could make sure that you're putting some of those practices into place. But today, what I wanted to explore is this idea about routines. How do we build these behavioral changes? How do we actually get these ideas into motion? So I think what's really helpful first when we talk about routines is to really acknowledge their value. Now, when we look at the literature, what the literature demonstrates is that routines give us a sense of order during uncertain seasons and during challenging times. So routines are a way of grounding us. The other thing that we know about routines is that they're very helpful to handle overwhelm. When you have a lot on your plate and you're navigating all of the different roles as essential frontline persons, it's actually quite easy to get drawn into that sense of overwhelm. So what we want to do is use our routines in such a way that actually structures our day so we can do some of that heavy lifting in a way that actually isn't going to burn us out anymore. So this allows us to be able to find some order. It helps to quiet some of the mental chatter. It helps to relax our nervous system when some things are mapped out and they're predictable. So we use routines as a way of a coping mechanism, really, to actually help us get ourselves grounded. So what I thought would be really helpful is, although we know routines are very good, and again, the literature backs that up, why are we so poor at following routines? Why do we struggle so much with routines? So I want to talk to you a little bit about like what gets in the way when we're trying to structure daily routines and practices that promote resiliency and wellness. And then we'll talk about some kind of ideas of what this could even look like. Like, what should we be trying to think about and put into our day? So I think first and foremost, the reason why we struggle with routines sometimes, and again, routines where we're bringing in wellness practices, why we struggle is this idea that we are creatures that like our freedom. We don't really like being told what to do or when to do it. We really like that sense of like having that flexibility. We don't want to be like held back. So our natural tendency is actually to resist structure. But what we do know is it does give our brain and our heart a wee bit of a rest. So it's kind of finding that competing blend. Now, there's an amazing writer by the name of Jocko Willings, and he is a former Navy SEAL. And he wrote a book recently. And one of his lines in the book, it just absolutely stopped me in my tracks. He said, with the discipline comes freedom. And what he talked about is when you have a solid structure and a disciplined routine, it actually gives you the freedom to feel how you want to feel. And it gives you more time and space because we learn how to work more efficiently. So I want us to think about this as this idea that this isn't holding us back. This isn't creating boundaries and preventing us from kind of living our true life and feeling good. This is going to give us that peace of mind so that way we can continue to do the things that matter most to us. So first, when we explore the notion of routines, I think there needs to be a bit of a discussion on the difference between motivation and discipline. So motivation is that little spark that you get that like turns you on to the idea that like, hey, this is this behavioral change I want to make, or this is something that I want to think about. Now, what we know is motivation is quite fleeting. It is very circumstance dependent. It's very hard to carry yourself through an entire experience relying solely on motivation. So we know we need other tools. And the other tools that we use is this idea of discipline. So this is when we choose what's kind of our long-term goal versus what's comfortable in the moment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the first way that I thought would be really helpful to think about this idea of your routines is to talk a wee bit about what gets in the way. Now, first construct that we see that gets in the way of people having health routines and wellness routines and practices that serve them is this idea that we call growth versus fixed mindset. Now, a fixed mindset sounds like this. I'm not a morning person. That's a fixed mindset. Or I don't have any discipline. That's a fixed mindset. Or I've always been uncomfortable in my own skin. It's always going to be this way. That's a fixed mindset. Or burnout is part of the job is a fixed mindset. Now, a growth mindset turns that around and says, you know what? I'm not a morning person yet. You know what? I haven't been able to find a health program that works for me yet. You know what? I haven't found a way to manage my stress in the place of employment yet. Now, that yet is key. That says it's available somehow. We just have to figure out how to get forward, how to move forward there. So we want to keep flexible thinking to know that these things are available. Now, the second area that I think we struggle with in terms of getting into some good routines is this idea of a lack of clarity. We don't really know what we're working towards. We don't really have a clear vision of what it is we want to accomplish or how we want to feel. So it's very important for clarity. Now, I hear people often say to me, Robyne, I want to handle stress, or Robyne, I want to feel better. Well, unfortunately, that's pretty abstract. I want clarity to be able to help us get our daily routines in order. So for the purpose of this segment, I thought we can explore this idea about a morning routine or a before shift routine, because we know in the literature, a morning routine is one of the biggest game changers to help you feel better. This is where we start. The morning is fresh, it's new. There's not a lot of habits in there quite yet that you start doing. So the morning is this opportune time to have some behavioral change. So if we want clarity on this idea, we want to make sure that we have a clear vision of what winning our morning looks like or starting our day out strong looks like. So one of the ways we can think about this is even just what time are we going to wake up? What time are you going to start your day? Now, a very dear colleague of mine, Dr. Fergal O'Hagan, he's a behaviorist and he studied sleep at a point, and he shared with me this really cool idea about sleep that I didn't think about before. He said to me that a lot of people put a lot of their energy on what time they go to bed at nighttime. That's where they kind of think about sleep starting. He challenged me to say, Robyne, it matters what time you wake up every day. Your morning time matters. He said your body will recalibrate based on what time you wake it up every morning. So I want you to think about with your morning routine is what time do you want to start your day and have clarity and make sure we know what that start point looks like. Now, the third kind of area that I see people sometimes get stuck on with routines is that they don't see the value add, right? Waking up at 6 in the morning for the sake of waking up at 6 in the morning doesn't seem like a lot of value addedness to me. But if we think about this idea about, okay, if I wake up at 6 in the morning before my household, that means I can get a walk in. That means I can spend some time with a hot cup of coffee and collect my thoughts. I can spend some time in reflection or prayer or meditation or even listening to an audiobook or a podcast. It just starts my day off right. So again, we want to see the value. We don't do behavioral change just for the sake of changing. We know there's enough change as there is in the world right now. We want to make sure it's purpose filled. Now, the next idea I noticed is that people tend to have a no failure plan. They just anticipate when they try to make a behavior change or set a new routine, it's going to go seamlessly. There won't be days when things go off course. We need to anticipate and expect there to be roadblocks. We need to expect and anticipate there's going to be challenges. Now, that doesn't deter us from starting. It means that when we come upon those setbacks, we saw this coming. We have a plan. We figured out how we were going to address that obstacle. And again, this often brings us back to this notion of being present over perfect. You don't have to do your routine perfectly. We really strive for that kind of 80-20% principle. If you're able to do it 80% of the time, you're going to experience the benefits. Now, another thing that kind of gets in the way is the reality of distractions, right? There's other things, maybe more exciting things or fun things to do. Sometimes that pulls us away from our goals. But again, being mindful of those distractions, being aware when they might come up, how you're going to address it is going to make a big difference. The next idea we talk about here is that kind of challenge between comfort and discomfort. We don't like to be uncomfortable. We don't really like change, although it's something that is so important to our growth and development. So sometimes the short term, we prefer to go the easier route or the simpler route, but the reality is we have to sometimes embrace the discomfort, recognizing it's when we're challenged and when we kind of shift, there's going to be some growth pains, but the value addedness is worth it. The other thing that I think about is kind of that immediate win versus that long-term gain, right? So, it's easier to hit snooze in the morning than it is to get up and get going. I like to think about it this way. Your first big decision in the morning is whether or not you can beat that alarm clock, in the sense that, we don't hit snooze, because then all of a sudden you're kind of surrendering into that easy win versus going for the long-term gain. Your first obstacle of the day is, can you master that alarm clock? And the last thing that I see here as well, when I think people struggle with some of their daily routines, is that they fill it up with this way of kind of like almost like punishing themselves, or they're taking away things that they enjoy, or they're making themselves really in this mindset of scarcity. Whenever you put yourself in a mindset of scarcity, unfortunately, what that does is it really causes your body to go into overdrive in the opposite way that you want it to work. So, for example, if you play around with like calorie restriction, it's just going to cue your brain that there's a famine happening and it's going to make you more hungry. So, again, understanding to work within our biology, we are people that like to be in control. We like to have this sense of abundance. So, you want to set up your plans and your goals, and you want to set up your daily routines in a way that's going to add value, that it's going to be something that's a privilege to be able to do, that this is something that's going to really help benefit you. Now, there's a lot of research around like what can this even start to look like, and especially for frontline workers, this is a concept I want to onboard you to. This is the importance when we think about daily routine to preload your self-care. When I work with service providers, so often they work all day and then they try to squeeze in self-care at the evening time, if that's your shift, or on the weekends, if you're working during the weekdays. And the reality is your evenings or your weekends, or when you have your recovery windows, those aren't long enough. Those aren't long enough to kind of repair the damage we're doing both physically and emotionally, psychologically. So we have to think about preloading our self-care. So what that means is before your shift, I want you to get out for that walk. I want you to do some of that stretching. I want you to find some of that stillness. Think about your breath work, because at the end of the shift, I want you to just be able to go home and be unproductive. I want you to be able to be unproductive and not give it a second thought. I don't want you to feel guilty. I don't want you to feel like you're supposed to be helping. I want you to be able to sign off at the end of the day. So when you preload your self-care, you get in that walk, you get in some of that good meditation time or time to really balance yourself, make what matters most, make those phone calls or send those emails that you really want to make sure that you send to keep up with our relations. You want to make sure you're doing that before you're too tired. So this idea of preloading your self-care is very important. And again, when we were talking about wellness, there is that kind of truth that we're coming upon where we've really embraced self-neglect. We've decided that this is the way we're always going to feel and there's no point trying to change it. Or this is part of the job. Burnout and dissatisfaction and feeling run down is just how this job looks. But I really want you to challenge that belief system, because that doesn't serve you. Self-neglect is not okay. You are worth being well. You are worth having a routine that is at a pace, and it is at a kind of a pace and flow that helps you feel the most aligned so you can be of service to others. Like, we want you to be able to feel compassion, to be empathetic, to really show up and see the value that you are bringing to the persons with disabilities that you are supporting. To be able to keep you on top performance, we really need to make sure that you're having daily routines that work for you. And I think, again, it's so important to reiterate, it's okay to have unproductive times. Part of a daily routine is having different forms of rest. Now, there's many different forms of rest. Often we think about it as physical rest, which is like sleep and napping, which of course, yes, that's important. But I also want you to have a rest from being helpful. I want you to have a rest from being productive all the time or being purposeful all the time. I want you to have a rest from screens and noises and demands. I want you to have a rest from always doing the obligatory, right? If you want to live rightly, we want to make sure that you have time to reflect, you have time to downshift, you have time to re-regulate. So you want to build your routine at such a pace that's sustainable. Now, the truth be, the sustainable pace that has been being projected during COVID, that's actually not sustainable. The amount of pressures and challenge, that's not something that we're going to be carrying for much longer. And what's very interesting, I've come upon in work that I've done with our military, there's actually like a set point where I know when I was supporting a group of civilians that were going on a deployment, that we don't keep them away for more than 9 months. We don't put them in stressful situations for that long, because it starts to erode their sense of wellness and their sense of self. Well, given where we are right now, it's almost been a calendar year since COVID went across Canada. It's almost been a calendar year that we've been working in these very precarious situations. we have to make sure we're getting that rest. We have to make sure that we're getting time and we have a daily routine that's going to allow us to continue to be of service to others by making sure that we are okay, because that's how we do and sustain the good work. So thank you. Merci, miigwech. I'll see you in our next segment. Bye for now.